I'm David Lee, and you're watching Pax8 Live.
We want to help you take your MSP business to the next level.
We have just expanded the amount of resources that you as partners have through Pax8.
Real security is about how you manage the losses, how you take the punches, how well you detect, how well you respond.
This is where we'll be bringing you content that you want to see every week to help you grow your business.
And I think the real winners here are the managed service providers.
Who is this?
Chief Cuteness Officer.
My advice is know what you're selling and know whether it's making you money.
I ended up living in Korea for 4 years.
I was wondering when we were going to talk about the elephant in the room.
But thanks, Dad.
Let's talk about risk assessment. So there's all kinds of ways to respond to risk.
Man, it's great to see you, Dom.
If you're really interested in just nerdy bits of home security, definitely check out those resources. That was a huge thunder.
What's up, everyone? Happy Friday, and welcome to the game on Pax8 Live, the show where we talk about all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. As always, let's start with a little housekeeping. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, interact with us. We'd love to have that. Today, we're talking about anonymity, which can be a very deep topic, so we're super excited to explore it. Don't forget, Pax8 Beyond registration is open. Mandatory plug has been achieved. Let's jump to the news.
I love it, Dom. Mandatory plug has been achieved. Fantastic.
Mandatory.
We've done our own compliance. We've done our own compliance work. Yeah. I need my proof pretty quickly so we can validate it, but I still think we're good. No, it's great, Dom. It's good to see you. We got tons of news today, so let's jump right into it. You know, we talked about this last year, Dom, but in November of 2022, LastPass actually had their breach, right? Their massive one where hackers stole, threat actors, let's not use hackers, stop it, article people. Threat actors stole password vaults containing both encrypted and plain text data, which we, sent the internet a storm last year, right? Of this concept of, wait, everything's not encrypted? But since then, a steady trickle of six-figure cryptocurrency heists targeting security-conscious people, those that are like you and me, Dom, where we're doing lots of stuff to try to protect ourselves throughout the tech industry, has led security experts to believe that these little cookie crumbs, right, somebody succeeded at cracking some of the LastPass vaults. Taylor Monahan, as lead product manager of MetaMask, a popular software cryptocurrency wallet, says that since late December 2022, Monahan and other researchers have identified a highly reliable set of clues, which I do love that they call it that say that they connect recent thefts to more than 150 people. Essentially, the victim profile remains the most striking thing that Monahan wrote. So, Dom, we talked about this. Let's break this down, ELI5, for someone to say how they got in and what this would mean. Like, what happened here?
Well, it's important to remember what encryption is, right? Encryption uses actually not very fancy math, but it's simple math at a very large scale to complicate data enough that it's very difficult or virtually impossible to reverse, right?
Right.
But in order for that to function, the underlying secrets that manage said encryption have to be great, right? So LastPass used acceptable encryption methods that, when done properly, should take something to the neighborhood of like 100 or 200 decades to crack. However, it's based on your master password. And I think there were two things going on here. At the time this incident occurred, LastPass wasn't doing a whole lot of PBKDF, which is password-based key derivation function.
They were doing like 10,000 rounds instead of 70,000 something, or 100,000 rounds. Yeah.
You want to be like in the 100, 150,000 range. So there's that. That has since been, they've changed that. But my biggest guess is that the master passwords just sucked, right? The master password, after it goes through those rounds, is indeed the encryption key, right? Perhaps with a little salt thrown on there. So if your master password wasn't great in LastPass, and you were a LastPass user at the time this incident occurred, you really should be rotating every single password in LastPass, because your vault was likely more susceptible to essentially brute force is all they're doing. They're trying the math over and over and over again until it's the right math.
And that's one of the things I did, Dom, right? When this came out and you and I talked about this. In fact, you and I actually chatted about this back and forth. Like, should I rotate every password in my 300 or 400 password list, right? And what I chose to do was just take the most sensitive ones that had money access, that had credit card information stored, that could do things that might be public, and just rotated those. But if you had done that, then, and you said this before the show, had someone cracked that master password and opened up that juicy vault with all those passwords, they would now get passwords that were no longer relevant, right? And I think that's still the takeaway from this, is if you are still a year later, and we're not quite a year, we're 2 months short, but if you're still a year later and you have not rotated those passwords, take and find the most sensitive stuff, your bank, your investment stuff, your kids' information for school, things that have pertinent information, healthcare, crypto, perhaps, maybe that giant juicy wallet of untraceable currencies. That may be the way we might look at this, right? And so rotate those, right? And move on from that. And that's one of the things that I think you learn from this is we all let laziness be the answer sometimes in face of risk. We're like, man, I really could change those passwords. Why don't I just rotate my master pass and I'm fine? And they knew, people were told you need to change passwords after this potentially, and people didn't. So that's what the first part of the news is that it does look like Krebs reports saying might be some actual data here that people are being compromised. Let's move on to the next article. All right, Dom, tell me what's going on here, buddy.
This is an interesting one. The headline really says it all in this one. Feds publicly name and shame 130 healthcare firms using web trackers. So in a nutshell, Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Health and Human Services publicly named 130 hospitals, telehealth companies, etc. They warned them that they're using online trackers, right? I'm not gonna stress the whole article, but an online tracker, Facebook or Meta has one called the Pixel. Google has trackers for analytics. It's essentially that whole third-party cookie web tracking debate. And the way these function is I'm able to send data of my choosing to that to track user behavior or advertising interests. And if I don't scope that API properly, and this has actually happened in the past, there was another provider that got caught sending like social security numbers and dates of birth and psychological conditions.
I know how we can index somebody. Let's use a social security number. Everybody's got one unique one. This is perfect.
Right? It's nuts. So these are warning letters. There wasn't an indication in the article that a breach has occurred, or according to HIPAA, definition of breach.
Sure.
But they're warning them like, hey, we found these trackers on your website or on your application. You should be wary about using them. And honestly, if I'm designing a healthcare platform, it doesn't have any of that in the secure mechanisms within the platform, right? That's just me. I wouldn't implement them. It could turn into a breach. We don't know yet. But the interesting thing to me is that OCR, the Office of Civil Rights and the Federal Trade Commission, came out and said, these are the providers, these are the exact, you can go to the article, the letters are there, exactly what they sent to each of these providers. So it's an interesting one, and it's very public name and shame, right? Which is pretty interesting to see out of these agencies.
And you did see that. One of the things this ties into is we've been talking about the False Claims Act in general, right? And when we start talking about it, they've included in that scope. In fact, False Claims Act, the DOJ Cyber Fraud Initiative was what it was called, using the False Claims Act, started in October of 2021. We actually had our first use and weaponization of that from the FTC by March of that next year, which means 5 months for the entirety of the investigation and litigation to come to a conclusion of a $900 million settlement. And that first one was a healthcare entity, and it was tied to these types of things. So they're saying, hey, if we pay you Medicare dollars, then you are under contract with us for that. And if you're not providing the adequate security controls and you have that breach or that leak of patient information on PHI, PII, things that matter, then that means you could have a fine from HHS. And from what you're talking about here, it sounds like they're trying to point out something that's tangential to that if done improperly would lead towards those. And they even gave an example of one that actually had a fine as a result of this in there. So
let's take an extra minute on this one and look at the implications, right?
Yeah.
Because the one that got fined was a virtual mental health provider, right? I won't name names, but they provide.
That doesn't have any implications
visits.
at all. Yeah,
and there was literally PII type information combined with like psychological diagnoses going to these trackers.
Once to imagine family, right? Like
imagine you visit your therapist, virtually, and then the next thing you know, you're getting ads on Facebook for specific drugs for your specific psychological issue or whatever you have going on. Like that would be terrifying. Right. The implications here are real. Healthcare data is its own class of sensitive data that you need to be extremely careful with.
Yeah, and it does tie into healthcare data is probably one of the most valuable on the dark web. I mean, just in general, for a lot of reasons. One of them being principally, you can set up a false billing organization and use those codes, use that information, use that insurance information to file and extract money from the insurance providers, right? So it's so juicy that you'll find records from healthcare finding 10x, 12x, 15x times the cost of a record for a credit card information, right? And so very, very critical, and also gives quite a bit of personal information that can be used for double extortion, that can be used for things of actually being that person, right? You have quite a bit of information there. So it's definitely a big one to talk about from this perspective. And Medicare and medical in general is going to find more and more stringent applications of HIPAA in general over time from this as well. So, all right, next article, Dom. We got just a whole menagerie of things today. So the next one we're going to talk about is Lockbit. Right, the City Council of Seville, Spain. So Dom and I felt like going international this week. Are recovering from Thursday's cyber attack that officials are attributing to Lockbit. Council said it will not pay a ransom of $1.5 million demanded by the hackers, according to local media reports. The incident has affected a broad range of city services, which we can dig into in a second, Dom. Police, firefighters, tax collection. I hate that. The attack began Monday, according to city officials, and it was initially identified as an internal system. They're probably wrong. The attack began way before Monday. They just didn't know.
Oh, for sure.
Further analysis soon revealed it to be a cyber attack. So you know what? It took a lot of analysis to read my ransomware note from Lockbit. But that's fair. Lots of analysis was done. Mayor Jose Luis Sanz said on Thursday the city is trying to restore services as soon as possible. Seville is the capital of Spain's autonomous Andalusia region. It's unclear if Lockbit stole any data. I can tell you right now, the answer is going to be they stole data. That's part of their shtick. That's part of their MO. So National Police and Incident Response of Spain's National Cyber Cryptological Center are involved in the investigation. Lockbit's been in the headlights all year, right? Taking credit for recent attacks on an electric vehicle utility in Montreal. And it goes on. I won't beat you to death with this. But the point is, we talk about cities and government entities. They've been pwned for years, right? We've been seeing this play out since, I guess, 2018, 2019. We've just seen a high rate of these. Yeah. But what happens when you as a government that is entrusted to deal with public safety, to deal with those impacts, it's very hard to sue your government often, but there has to be some ramification because this is going to do a lot of damage. If police is down and something's being called in and we can't get dispatch, that person doesn't get served. And if we can't get someone to the hospital because their systems are down, we can't get them treated. And I think there's just a lot of interesting parts about government getting popped from these perspectives. And when people say they think the attack began on Monday, I just want to remind people there's an initial compromise phase. Right? I got a friend of mine, Britton White, that all he does, literally with his free time, is go on the dark web, pull credentials from redline malware and other things in different spaces, and then go and notify those victims. Let them know, hey, just so you know, right, somebody's had your data on your passwords from your machine and all these company information for 3 months. And so the threat actors have probably already done initial compromise, gained access, gained a foothold, done their enumeration, found where the valuable juicy bits are, and then attacked. That's how they were able to take out so many of those systems, was by enumerating and spreading before you actually detonate, right? And so one of the calls to action I want to make out of this article is that MSPs often have ransomware, let's restore. You don't know when to restore to. If you're first in that incident and you have a ransomware and you're like, I'll go back to yesterday's data, how long have I actually been in your system? That may be significantly before yesterday. And so we need to make sure that people are doing that forensics dig in and understand whether or not they know whether the asset has still compromised at a certain date and time. So,
and back to implications too. Think about how much information you submit to your municipal government, right, or to your state government, or to whatever. I said, like they said, tax information. I don't know how taxes work in Spain, but I know when I file taxes, I put a whole lot of information on those forms before I file them. Right. So we're talking about identity theft. We're talking about a clear understanding of your financial situation, how much money I can extort you for because your investment assets were in there.
Right.
How much they grew or shrunk over.
We know your numbers, your free cash. Right.
Right. So city governments and all governments maintain a lot of data. I do hope to see, more. We talked to CISA a lot about this and more resources coming in, especially for these smaller municipalities, to be able to defend themselves and to have controls in place and to be able to detect, like you said, that left of boom incident, that initial compromise, and stop it, right? Because there's just so 100%. Much at stake there.
And it also gets into, if you have a ransomware event, there's a pretty good likelihood you have not implemented all of the 153 CIS safeguards, right? There's a pretty decent chance you don't have those things in place, especially if it's that large and that successful at taking everything out. So, all right, Microsoft, I think, is our next article. Let's kick that up. Microsoft, Washington on the 6th, recently disclosed, I got my thing in the way of here, Chinese hack with senior officials of U.S. states. So we're going back to some of this information that we talked about after Move It, when they came out and talked about this massive compromise we saw. Microsoft said the engineer's account had been penetrated by a hacking group it dubbed Storm 0558, which is alleged to have stolen hundreds of thousands of emails from top American officials, right? This was that big public announcement about 6 weeks ago with respect to the U.S. government. The blog post addressed some unanswered questions around the incident, which drew fresh scrutiny to Microsoft's security and led calls to investigate the company's practices. And I think we'll dig into that in a minute. Notably, the post explained how hackers were able to extract a key from the engineer's account and use it to access email accounts that should never have given them access to. Microsoft said it fixed the flaws that led to the key being accessible from the unidentified engineer's account, which gave the threat actors such a wide latitude to steal emails. Microsoft representative said the engineer's account had been hit using token sealing malware, which is going to be a EvilGenix proxy, quite likely EvilGenix 3, but did not provide further detail about the incident. The Chinese embassy in Washington did not immediately return the email. Of course they didn't. We'll talk to you about it later. We're good. We'll email back. We're going to be fine. Yeah. The ways I've seen this described is like the menagerie of things that had to go wrong for this to be the case that it is today. But that really is the point. You and I have talked about this forever, Dom, this middle theory of saying, consumers' maturity dictates the outcome of the product. The lower the consumer maturity of something, the lower the quality or outcome of that product will be, because there's no reward in capitalism for being better than what people are asking for and better than what people are demanding. And when it comes to these new technologies and dealing with building tech in general, there's almost zero regulations and governance that force people to be good at this secure by design and secure by default. And when we talk about CISA's big call of secure by design and secure by default, you have a situation where it wasn't secure by design, and quite likely it wasn't even using all of the capabilities. I can tell you that Defender for Business, during the time window of this attack, does detect EvilGenix proxies. It can find those. They are very easy to see. And the reason is, with an AITM, you have a sign-in from a user, a sign-in from a different place purporting to be that user that's correlated back at the same timestamp and same token. And now they know something must be in the middle. It can't be where they're coming from. Now, there's other things like VPNs and things that could kind of emulate that behavior. But it definitely does give that sense that not only was it not secure by design, that it had these flaws in this key. The key should not have accessed the email it had access to. It should not have been usable in that craftable fashion. But on top of that, you didn't actually even see that the AITM was detected ultimately. So definitely some scary stuff there. And I think we won't see the end of this. But I will say, I don't want to dissuade people from using the Microsofts, the AWSs of the world. They have their own challenges just like you do. But if you're introspective about your own security practices, about how you manage things, you probably would not pass muster to even close to the level they're actually achieving today, right? And even with their failures, even in their own things, we all have to get better. We all have to do this better. And as this consumer maturity continues to rise, as you continue to rise in your own maturity, we're going to demand more from the Microsofts and the AWSs of the world. But you know what? They also have the money to deliver that. And that does work out in our favor. And I do think this is just a step along the way of where we head from our security journey.
Like the cryptographic key notwithstanding, like stealing cryptographic key should be one of the most difficult things to do in the technology space. But
that's why there's even an HSM or a hardware security module, right? To do that.
Yeah. Yeah. But we talk a lot about nation state attacks. And I probably said on the show, if you are up against a nation state, it's just a matter of when. Like if they are persistent enough, right? Because they tend to be very well funded, particularly in China and some other countries. They're very well funded and they're focused on a mission, which obviously their mission was to steal U.S. government data, which is one of China's most valuable espionage missions, probably the most valuable.
Right.
So I also understand the level of adversary they're going up against is very high. And they, you talked about evil Gen X. It's not outside of the realm of possibility that they've just come up with something new, right? They're very good at what they do, just like our people.
Different internet proxies, something that blends in easier. Right. It's very true. It's very true. One of the things I want to bring up, we had a comment on my LinkedIn stream from Matthias Groomer, said that happened with two of my customers at an MSP I worked for. The ransomware was there long time before the restore points were available, right? Sleeper ransomware, basically stating, the threat actor knew if I could just wait the 14 days that most people have backups for, golden, right? And so you get into that point of saying, hey, all I have to do is just wait until the time frame of my access will be restored, and I will be able to come back and re-ransom. And what it does is it's trying to take away that ability to recover, right? We talk about double extortion. This is really working back on the first part of that primary extortion of ensuring that you can't restore it. And even if you do, then it's going to be compromised potentially. So, all right, let's get our last article in. We're only like 12 minutes over, but this has been a blast on our news articles. So we'll bring in our guest here soon and have a really good chat. This last one is the Office of Public Affairs made this announcement talking about Verizon Business. This was just a few days ago, but you remember we talked about the civil fraud initiative, the cyber civil fraud initiative by the DOJ.
Right.
This is one of those playouts where they paid $4.1 basically million to resolve an FCA or False Claims Act allegation that it failed to completely satisfy certain cybersecurity controls in connection with an information technology service. So Verizon was selling a private internet access in 2017 to 2021, and the Department's Civil Fraud Initiative provide credit in settlements to government contractors to disclose misconduct, cooperate with pending investigations, and take remedial measures, all of which are critically important to protecting the nation against cyber threats. And so the whole mission of this is to say, we're going to penalize those that lie to us in a contract. And if you remember, Dom, what year was the False Claim Act written? This quick pop quiz.
1863.
Yeah, 1863. So we are seeing activism in the form of the Department of Justice using a 1860s law about canteens, right? Essentially over defrauding the federal government to then apply because of the looseness of it. It says in any way, if you haven't met what you said you're going to do. And they're using that very, very, very effectively, right? October 6th, the Deputy Attorney General came up and said, we're going to be doing this. And then they just got to work. So we won't beat this to death, but I do want to keep this on people's radar that, we're starting to see more and more precedent. Does $4 million mean anything to Verizon? Nope. That's probably less than a couple of executives bonus this quarter. That said, it is still setting precedent that if you start doing these things, just like Jen Easterly said at Carnegie Mellon, that you will see us shifting the liability and responsibility for these actions up to those companies that are the stewards of our data. And we're going to start seeing that more and more, and we're going to find more and more unique ways. And if I wanted to make a prediction on this show, I think we'll see the consumer safety and consumer safety acts be applied in some of these same ways to software. And I think we'll see similar things play out in the government before we see real legislation.
Like the amount of physical 100%. Stuff I get to control with the internet, right? Like it's going to get hairy if we don't start seeing secure by design soon.
Yeah, 100%. And they're probably some of the worst devices, right? Like I'm pointing at you, IoT people. It's okay. But all right, let's bring in some brilliant. Y'all have heard from us enough right now. Let's go ahead and bring in some brilliant words from Robin Harris, and then we'll get back with our awesome guest to talk about anonymity.
I want to tell you a trend that I'm seeing with our clients, and it does mean more work for us, but I really, really appreciate it. Our clients are becoming more and more security conscious. Now, what does that mean? It means we're starting to see more and more risk assessments, more requests to view our SOC 2, more requests about our ISO certification. We've got more potential clients wanting to see what our security posture is before they do business with us. Now, it's more work. I will not kid you. It is more work, but I love it. I love it because this tells me that on a whole, the industry is growing. We're growing, we're maturing. And I want you to consider that as you want to play with more sophisticated clients, bigger clients, that you really, really, really want to start using security and compliance as one of your differentiators. Because there are a lot of little companies out there, they're not doing it. They're not doing it. And that's going to make you stand out. You want your salespeople to say, hey, yes, we're ISO certified. Yes, we have our SOC 2 certificate. Yes, we're doing the things we need to do to protect our clients. That's a selling point. That is a selling point. But you cannot make that claim if you're not doing the work. So make sure your security posture makes you stand out in the market and makes your potential customers happy to do business with you.
It's always great to hear more brilliant words from Robin. We're really looking forward to having her
They're
back
not
on
doing
actual
it.
shows. They're not touching you. Yeah, I don't know. Always good things to say about what she has to say. Make sure you take her advice because she's dealing with it at our scale every day. So yeah, that's that.
For sure. I will say I'm excited about bringing back our guest. She is a powerhouse. She's fun. She's energetic. She has the coolest glasses game I've ever seen in my life. But we're going to banter about the positive and negative sides of digital anonymity, the way the internet works, the way we function today in varying stages of anonymity. And I'd love to have you comment and talk and chat. We'll bring you up. Matt Topper, it's great to see you here, brother. It's great to see you as well, Matt Horning. I think we're just collecting Matts in the audience today. But let's bring in Lindsay and let's get started down this path of digital anonymity. Hey, Lindsay, what's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me back, y'all.
Well, we had to up the cool factor, right? Like Dom and I only hold a certain percentage of cool. We needed to really get that number up a smidge. So yeah, there's a cap on the cool factor.
Some giggle reels up in here.
Yeah, exactly.
Break up some of the
I need to up the giggle factor. So let's talk about this. The internet was born, right, as ARPANET and initially was really not secure by design. And what I mean by that is it was an IP connecting to another IP on whatever level layer 7 protocol you decided it was going to be at the end. And then that was really it. The challenge is, as we've gone through this, their end benefit maybe has been that there's degrees of anonymity. What I mean by that is, let's say I'm maybe this dog, let's say, right? We're Lindsay's dog and we brought in your dog here for this. So let's go ahead and cut to that, right? So we have Milo. This is the dog Facebook post, right? We've got all the stuff here. But is that Milo? Or perhaps maybe it's Spud, right? It's maybe a different dog, or it's perhaps something else. And so when we look at creating a Facebook account, if I wanted to steal your pictures, right? There's a presentation I gave called When Grandma Ain't Grandma, and it was for 8th graders. And it was saying, if I wanted to create a Facebook profile as Grandma, I can do that by just taking her pictures, by creating an account with some email address that I also don't have to prove I'm me to get, and then set that up. And I'm now Grandma. And I can ask for you to give me your address so I can send you a present. I can do things that cross that physical barrier with a relative degree of anonymity, right? And I think that that's the topic of today. Go ahead, Lindsay.
I was gonna say, we were talking about this earlier. It's like there's a whole show about this of people stealing each other's identities and creating up.
Yeah,
I
catfish.
feel like the millennial generation, yeah, catfish is like a real thing for all of us. I think I've been catfished a couple of times in my life, to be really honest, out there in the day. It's wild how easy it is to just take somebody else's information by copying and pasting
Yeah.
just an open source social media account. Like, it's wild.
100%. So what I'd like to do for our conversation is I've got a couple of bullet points. I want to introduce them and let's just chat about it, right? So I'd like to start first with the positive sides of anonymity, right? Let's talk about why is it good? And that's what I want to focus on first. And then we'll take that obverse opinion and talk about why it's bad. So my first point I want to discuss is freedom of expression, right? Anonymity allows us to express our opinions without fear of reprisal, persecution, retaliation. It's really important in countries that really don't let you talk or have freedom of expression, right? We have freedom of the press. We have our protections under the law in the United States. And so what about this? Let's talk about the positive side of that. Can anybody want to open it up? Dom, you or Lindsay?
Freedom of expression, it's an interesting one. But it is hugely important. Where I would digress that and where we start talking about the ins and outs of anonymity is how can you be anonymous? But from a freedom of expression perspective, we've seen countless stories, specifically for press or traveling press that are exposing, frankly, atrocities, being able to get their message out. This is where you see a whole lot of platforms like Proton, which is a Switzerland-based email provider. Signal is really powerful for this. And you get to have these conversations that it could be severe consequences if you're caught having that conversation otherwise.
Sure. Yeah, and to your point of your anonymity isn't so anonymous, right? If we talk about even the threat actor groups that we're tracking, well, a lot of them are on the OFAC list, right? They're on the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC list. And those are tied and attributed to wallets all the time, right? So those can be brought back. We've seen the Department of Justice clawing back funds and finding out threat actors. And so you see that even real anonymity isn't super anonymous, but you're right on the fact that it does allow that freedom of expression and maybe some pseudo anonymity, at least in those instances, or at least cryptographic protection potentially of that data, right? That we start.
That's where I would categorize it. Like you can't necessarily tell what I'm saying in that scenario, but you can probably figure out who I am.
That's fair. That's fair. And I think that actually brings us to another point I want to talk about. What about whistleblowers, right? When we think about someone that wants to expose wrongdoing, and your example was about atrocities, but in the same breath, we're talking about maybe just telling on my company that didn't do something right, and you want to be able to do that. It allows potentially for some of that anonymous communication to exist, right, from that perspective. But while we're at it, Lindsay, what is one of the things that where anonymity in general is actually a bad thing, right? Help me understand some of those, and then we'll kind of come back to the good points. But where's a negative point? Let's kick into one of those.
Yeah, I think some of the dangers, especially is social media is the big one that comes to me, especially with the work that we're doing right now with our CSR partner Everfree. I feel like I'm learning more and more every single day in this space of how do you balance. And because again, you want to have this aspect of freedom of speech and you want to authentically live who you are and share that with the world. But there is this space too, where it's it opens you to a lot of risk. And if you don't put up, I mean, really even basic security measures for yourself and for your family and for your loved ones and for everyone that is in that space that you have aspect to influence, then you have the ability to, like what we were talking about before, someone else get access to your personal information, get access to your healthcare information. When y'all are going through the news, that really hit me. I'm an openly neurodivergent, for somebody to get my medical information and what I'm going through, that's some scary stuff. Because not only can you take my pictures off my social media site or, grab some YouTube, and now with AI and the way that you can create these, AI beings that can create content for you. I mean, really, honestly, someone can take on your entire identity and it would be really difficult to track that and to be able to loop it back. So, that's what's been top of mind for me is really the social media side and just making sure that, a simple photo can be dangerous, and
Yeah.
you've got to think about that as, are you tagging where you're at every day? Are you tagging and putting personal information where they can turn around, and cyber criminals and stalkers and people like that can steal from you, blackmail you, harass you? I mean, the list can go on outside of just the digital aspects too.
Yeah. One of the interesting concepts that I've heard kicked around really is focusing on a concept around distributed identities, right? DID. There's several protocols for it. You have distributed identity web, you have distributed identity ion. One of them uses blockchain, one's DNS based. But at the end of the day, it comes to this point of trying to maintain anonymity. Sorry, that one's for Claire. I just clarified my own self there, but
just
anonymity. Yeah, exactly. Not an anonymity, anonymity. No,
okay, Nemo.
I lost my train of thought with my own words there. That's unfortunate. Yeah, with these distributed identities, you have some component of anonymity from the perspective of my data isn't actually being shared. I'm not giving my driver's license. I'm not giving you my number. I'm simply asserting that I have my number, and it could be tracked back to a real Matt, right? But when we talk about anonymity on the web, there's other components of this that I'd like to focus on, right? And one example of this is everything we've been talking about so far has been like pseudo anonymity, right? I'm saying I'm Matt, and as long as I am Matt, then I'm not very anonymous, right? And the data I'm sharing is real, and it becomes something that allows someone else to be pseudo Matt and fake be Matt, right? In that regard. And so one of the things that I guess if I could give a helpful hint to people around social media, a little bit off of anonymity, is if we already know the data structure itself is pseudo public and pseudo anonymous, then why not lie? And what I mean by that is I lie on almost everything. Every date of birth at every platform is different. Every address is different. Every state is different. Every piece of me is full of fake me, right? And so I would just say there are ways to take and control some of that by giving bad data so that it isn't actually directly correlatable back to you in meaningful ways, especially around finance, around access, around government, around some of those things. But you can't stop all of it, right? And I think some of the benefits of anonymity that do come to mind in my mind would be like not able to be tracked. Look at Dom's point of the tracking cookies from being in that medical provider. What if I had actual true anonymity where you can't see that? I'm not allowing tracking cookies. I'm hiding that. I'm maybe coming through things. And in fact, anonymity is the whole reason the dark web was invented. As we talk about this coming from another DARPA research project, I think this was DARPA, right, Dom? It wasn't U.S. Navy?
I think it was DARPA.
It was DARPA. Yeah, it came through the concept of the dark web. So, Lindsay, where does that come into play when it comes to this anonymity of criminal threat actors that literally now are anonymous down to where they're even coming from, right? What IP, what network, what country? How does that play in?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from an aspect of like, people being able to take on your identity and not, or sorry, on the other side, words are hard today, y'all. We're gonna fly the Nemo boat.
I just did an anemone, so yeah, I'm with you.
And you're the cyber specialist here. This is not my specialization. No, I think it's the fraudulent and the deception aspect of it, but also when you're trying to hide, like. I think that's where a lot of this, aspect of the dark web and the illegal and harmful content, that's where it's brewing, right? And I think that what we're finding too is that it's not really that difficult to access the dark web. And that's what a lot of people don't really, I think, understand or comprehend is that just as us as normal humans, like it's pretty easy to get on the dark web if you have the right type of protocols set up for yourself to be able to have that anonymity and to be able to have that security for your own privacy. If you're wanting to look at things that are harmful content or get access to drugs or, all of the other things that live in that aspect of the dark web, data
I only
access,
go there on Thursdays.
You can, yeah, seriously. I know you're probably in there going, I wonder, Matt Lee, what do we got for sale this week? How much are people bidding on my beard today? But I think it's one of those that like people just don't really realize that it's that easily accessible, and it's not difficult for you to be able to hide yourself. I mean, really, VPN, add in some encryptions. You want to, prevent your ISP from being able to track your information and stuff like that. You can reroute your traffic. You can reroute, your backend. And again, not the most technical person in this space. Y'all can definitely speak deeper to that. But, as someone who's not super technical, it is still, you have to be aware of at least the entry line aspects of what they have to do to have that negative anonymity in the dark web space, but also what do you need to do to make sure that someone doesn't get access to be able to take your anonymity or your own.
Yeah. Well, while we're at it, Dom, like, I did just validate I was wrong. It is not DARPA. Onion routing is just the basics of dark web. I was like, I can't be right on this. I think I'm wrong. It is the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory that created the dark web, essentially. Can you talk a little bit, Dom, about what your knowledge of what is the dark web? Like, help people understand what's the dark web and why did it exist?
It's not called the dark web. I was just put that out there first.
Okay.
It's called Tor. Okay.
Oh,
I
there's
believe
a real
it stands
name
for
it? No
there
way.
is a real name for it. I believe that stands for the onion router. I think is
I was going to say
and it uses the onion protocol, which not to get too nerdy about this, but 5,000 foot overview. If I hop through 10 different places before I then hop out onto the internet, I get very difficult to find. In a nutshell, all you really need to get on there is a browser, and it's called the Tor browser. And now there's other browsers that have added Tor support and other tools to get on Tor through some different measures and protocols. And I think there's a distribution of Linux that has it integrated. So there's a lot of different ways to get on Tor. And then from there, you're kind of still on the internet, right? And that's what I want to point out is it is still infrastructure that exists on the internet. It is still connected at some point over TCP/IP. However, there's this other layer of Tor connected infrastructure, right? And that's where we talk about onion links or something.onion, which is where these.
I believe that was the transmission control protocol, internet protocol that you just referenced there. I don't want to steal your. Yeah. I don't want to steal your thing here.
Swiper, no swiping.
I did. I stole your acronym.
So you're still on the internet, but when you're on the Tor network, you start to have access to these onion links, right? And it's essentially servers hosted within the Tor network, and you're accessing it not necessarily through the public internet. You're accessing it through this tunnel, and that's where the dark and shady stuff tends to be. There are legitimate onion sites, by the way. There's major news organizations that have onion endpoints so that you're able to safely consume their news. But when we think about the bad guys on the internet or on the dark web, we're generally talking about, Lockbit's onion website where they're going to sell all that data they just stole from Seville, Spain, right? But you can also use Tor to browse the general internet, and all it's doing is bouncing you all over the place and putting you out, typically in some other part of the world. That's
well,
Tor.
Let's talk about why that's good and bad, right? So the reason it's invented is to hide infrastructure, right? If I can use the Tor network, then any onion router that's out there can be a place for my exit and entrance nodes. So the way this would work is I set up a shady server somewhere. It's running in a data center just like anything else. It's not like they're dark computers. They don't turn into this completely dark ephemeral thing, but they're just regular servers.
No, they're purple for sure.
We set up.
Sure they're purple.
They're purple. That's fair. You're right. They've always been purple. But you think about it, you can set up a server and it has an internet connection, right? It has a regular internet connection. You simply run a service on that machine that then takes and routes traffic in and out over that internet connection. And then a series of keys are exchanged between the next router and the next router, and it gets layered like an onion to exit somewhere. Well, the benefit of that is you can hide where your infrastructure is, where you might be doing your research, where you might be exiting data out of a country, where you might be doing those things by having it go out somewhere else. But here's where that's a problem sometimes. When you think about this, this also creates, back when we talked about kinetic response to cyber, right? When we talked about a wet work response to cyber, you first saw this happen in Israel back during the attack on Iron Dome when you saw the rockets being sent. They were actually taking out the social media team on the other side that was running the actual rocket barrages, because the way the rockets worked, you had to light a fuse like a bottle rocket and have a few hundred of them in the air at any given time to overwhelm Iron Dome. That was the goal. And so they just took out the Facebook team that were actually updating and communicating that structure, or the social media team. What's interesting is the problem with taking kinetic action based on cyber events is what happens when that's leaving grandma's house, right? What happens when that traffic is being anonymously routed through a bot that's running in grandma's house in the United States? Are we going to take kinetic action against Granny? Right? Do we not have the ability, because of the anonymity that it creates, to actually find that threat actor? And that was the purpose of Tor, right? That was the purpose of the United States Navy. Researching that was the ability to have anonymity and have the ability to use, transfer, and move data on the public internet as a dark web type resource that routes that. So we talk about it, it almost seems like when it comes to the internet, there's a positive and a negative to anonymity, right? Think about a crime in the real world. Let's say there's a kidnapping. Someone steals the Milo, let's say. Poor Milo has been kidnapped, right? And so when we think about this,
okay, because they didn't steal Mo, so it's no big deal.
Yeah, I was going to say his name's Mo.
I thought it was Milo. I invented the wrong dog name,
Mo.
but we're now changing it to Milo.
You sure?
That's my nickname. I'm going to be like, oh, Milo, it's great to see you. But let's say we steal real dog Mo
That's his
of
alter
Milo.
ego.
Okay, good. But if we do that and you see that human is initially anonymous, right? We have a picture of someone, we know their description, we know what they look like. We don't have that attributed to a name, right? You'd have to have fingerprints and them having filed those fingerprints or DNA samples to then match that human to then validate that's that person. So you kind of have that. And now on the internet, you have anonymity. You have very limited sources of figuring out actually who that person was, right? And so that's one of the biggest challenges to that. But if we wanted to focus back on some of the other positives that we get into, we can see it doing things like supporting vulnerable populations, right? It allows people to be more creative because they can express themselves without that fear of reprisal. Potentially, they could create that complete alter ego and go catfish. Oh no, that's the bad use. That's the bad use. I forgot. We're thinking about good uses, but they can go and create that anonymous profile and become the biggest, podcaster ever that's not known. Like, look at Lockpicking Lawyer. Nobody knows who Lockpicking Lawyer is, but I've watched thousands of his videos and love his witticisms and the things he thinks about and talks about. Hey, he has a great Nietzsche quote that he's on stage all the time.
Sure.
But he's hiding from Masterlock because he talks mega trash on Masterlock. And they will definitely send some bad guys to come take care of the problem, huh? Right? So I think that you see the benefits of anonymity, right? Because it allows creativity and expression. And it can also do things like limit corporate tracking, like we talked about. But it does also allow for things that were super big. And I don't want to touch on the politicization of this, but I do want to say it does allow for massive amplification of misinformation and fake news. Right? When we think about it, back in the 1950s, when espionage wanted to paint the picture of J. Edgar Hoover being gay, which would be a very bad thing at that time in the 1950s, they had to get a physical human in the United States to be able to start interacting with people, to have the ability to spread this rumor, and then have that rumor grow and be big enough. They have to physically put people in harm's way to do that. Now all I have to do is create a fake social media profile, or thousands of them. And I can influence massive things around the globe by creating fake information that is very hard to remove. In fact, there's an old quote about misinformation that it takes thousands of times more real information to overcome one piece of bad information well spread, right? And it comes into that situation where you can use that as a weapon. And so anonymity has been used as an espionage weapon in not just the United States,
it applies
but
to
all
the
over the
other
world.
side of the internet. Because there's a lot of people that believe whatever they read on the internet, and the first thing is absolutely the most true fact. And I have family members that are like that, so I know for a fact that they believe this stuff. And that therein presents the challenge, right? If we think about the growth of the digital age, right? Reading say a newspaper or watching the daily news that is produced once a day, and it's well understood. And by the way, it covered the events of the day. Versus today's even real news cycle that is mostly garbage. Oh, by the way, someone got stabbed at Wash Park and it's going to be rainy tomorrow, right? Like that's what we're dealing with. And you throw in garbage Facebook and X posts, Twitter, and everything else that comes with that. You're consuming so much information digitally that you're likely to believe it. I mean, how often do we see people share an article because they don't like the headline, but they didn't read one lick of the article? Right.
Yeah, true story. And I've done it myself before, right? I've failed.
Yeah. That description. It's like that's so right. Like I have family members as well, Dom, that are in that same space where it's like, oh, but this is what it said, but actually didn't read the entire article because
5G is cooking us.
I know, seriously. The 3-second scroll time, right? It's like don't even take the time to actually read the 3.5-minute read article, and it's also that instant gratification. Like if you hear multiple things over and over, and you've got we have a saying in our household, everybody's perspective is their reality. And so if you have all of these different realities, but even, people sharing those perspectives, but they may not all be truthful. You hear that over and over. That's a subconscious, it lives in your brain subconsciously. And so there's a big piece of that too, where it's like the control aspect of just fake news and that, and misinformation is insane nowadays.
And you can move populaces to do things. Yeah. Go ahead, Dom.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to drag us back in time a few minutes because Laura asked a question on YouTube
awesome.
related to your intentional social media misinformation. And I feel real bad for whoever Matt Lee is in Utah because he's just getting so many cold calls from security vendors. But, the question is, what advice would you give to a person who is honest to a fault and feels extreme apprehension about not being consistently authentic? I think that's a really powerful question because a lot of times we want to be authentic in human interaction, right? But we're kind of saying, don't be authentic.
Well, I suppose I'm saying there's a strategy of don't be authentic, right? I think there is a strategy of what I call OSINT poisoning. I'm simply placing out bad breadcrumbs to hide some of the good ones. Even
OSINT means open source intelligence.
You stole my acronym. Dang it, Dom. Fine. It's okay. Two can play at that game. But yeah, I think tying back to that aspect of it, I lost it again. I keep getting just completely derailed by this conversation, but that's okay. I wanted to hit a couple more. To Laura's question. So I think when you talk about being honest and being authentic to a point, I don't think you have to not be you authentic. You just might not be you authentic pointing at your house number. And you might not be you authentic at pointing at the evidence that actually gets information about you. And I think it's up to the individual person to decide where's that risk profile. I happen to be a cybersecurity guy that talks a lot of crap about companies and bad guys. And it might be beneficial of me to have some degree of that protection of where I actually might live and where I might actually go and things like that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with being honest about yourself on the web. I think you just have to be conscientious about your operational security or OPSEC, right? And so I think that's the big piece of thinking there. Like, we don't want poor Milo, not the other real name, but we don't want poor Milo getting dog napped over here because we put our street address up, right? And
think about the most classic example of that, like early days of like MySpace transitioning into Facebook. This became like huge news.
MySpace.
It's like, hey, MySpace was better. You can't change my mind.
So dope. Yeah,
but anyways,
no doubt.
If we think about, we put our birthday on MySpace or Facebook or whatever, so we get all of our friends, we get the happy birthday messages, and then it's like, oh my God, you're 30. So now I have your date of birth. Great.
Yeah. I know.
And then I go digging around and I find your house
right?
address. I already know your name. That's enough information almost to start applying for loans, right? And then I go to your CPA's Facebook page, because I see this a lot, by the way. I go to your CPA's Facebook page who does your taxes, and they took a picture of their sweet new desk and your tax returns just sitting there, right? So it starts to get very easy to gather a lot of information about you. So that's what you need to be cognizant of. Like, you know, if you want your birthday to be public because you like that, great. I would just maybe change the year, right? So you know my birthday's on whatever day it is. Or maybe think about, you know, perhaps using a nickname publicly, right? There's very small things you can do, and you're just limiting. And the people that need to know the real stuff know the real stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly.
I was going to say too, it's like, if you think about those art pieces, like, I don't know if y'all have seen this, but like there's, this is an exhibit at Meow Wolf Denver, a nice plug for them, where like when you change the colors, the different colors or different parts of the paintings or these pieces of art show up under different colors of light. So under the red, you know, light, certain parts of the colors show up, and then under the blue, a whole different part of, so this is a little cybersecurity, red versus blue in here too for you.
I love it.
That it's the same art piece, right, in the back, but it's just a different color of light that's being shined on it. And so that's the way that I like to say when you,
that's
you
brilliant.
can still authentically
like that. That's
be
on
yourself.
point,
Yeah, so be yourself and show, but again, don't give the full color of what purple light on that would look like. Just shine the red or just shine the blue. So you have that ability to be yourself and to show up
And
authentically,
check your
but
privacy
they don't get the whole
settings.
picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes,
Make sure the
100%.
people that
Definitely
need to see
that.
no colors see no colors. Like that's an important bit too.
Yeah.
So I don't want to miss some comments. Matt Horning said, cyber criminals is one thing, but government coming after you is another ball game, right? And that gets right back to when we were talking about government and being able to speak with freedom of speech against, you know, in a regime. And then Matt said, wouldn't that be dog fishing when I was talking about the kidnapping of the dog?
Fishing.
So it was pretty good. And then also goes on to say,
I mean, with
love
that stash,
Lawyer.
it was some pretty dog fishing.
That is a dope stash too. I'm not sure where he goes, but I want to go see the groomer for sure. It's pretty good. You're like, listen, I'll lay on the the table. You can use the whole neck thing. I won't move. But you want to trim this thing up? It looks super good.
Get us some wax him out.
And then Matt Horning said, and Matt Lee is in witness protection as proof by being in a hotel room right now. Man, I literally live in hotel rooms predominantly. So, but you're not wrong. Maybe there's a fair amount of truth to that, I suppose, Mr. Horning, if that is your real name, sir. But anyways, okay. So back to the point, though. Misinformation and fake news is a real challenge of anonymity. And if we were to tie to a one-to-one reality where if I'm on the internet, I am one-to-one identifiable as some object. Now, I don't know that has to be my name or anything identifiable, but it does have to be one-to-one tied to a human body somewhere as an identity. If we were to go down that path, let's just maybe imagine a little. What changes, right? If we go down that path where Lindsay is L something, no matter what, we can always identify it back to Lindsay, and she has some potential implications as Lindsay if she does bad things. What do we gain from that? What do we lose from that? Right? That's the question I'd love to ponder for the next few minutes. And anybody in the audience, please chat and ask questions and add that in if you have some things or thoughts you'd like to add to it. So,
I'm like, my wheels are turning in this space because you lose a piece of yourself, like your privacy as yourself.
Yeah.
Like that you completely, and I think that's part of like us being humans is we should have just the ability to be able to discover and to search and to be who we are, like the way that, the comment about being able to authentically show up. But then there is a space where like the accountability, so there could be some positives behind it. But I mean, we see countries today that have open access to every single walking movement of the humans in those countries. And it's pretty scary what the government does.
Some of them
with those
even
things.
score you based on your walking movement.
Yeah.
Like it's wild.
Yeah. You could have a social score or something to that effect, right? Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's definitely one of the downsides. I think when you think about the positives for me would be you now have culpability for actions, right? One of the things about the internet that's different than my house example is I've got to physically be there. I've got to be in your circle. I've got to be around you to start getting these pieces of data. When you talk about the internet, I don't even have to know you. You don't even have to know I'm looking at you. You don't even have to know that I'm doing that research. In fact, most of the things that I would do if I ever was a bad Matt, let's say, because I certainly don't do them now, if I was digging into someone, is dig in a lot about them first in very anonymous ways where I can learn lots and lots of information. And you don't even have to know that. And I think that's the difference of why this is so poignant is when it comes to your house, you can choose not to interact with certain people. You can choose not to go to certain neighborhoods. You can choose not to expose yourself to certain things. And you can even lock the door at night and be alone and nobody near you. Your online profile is usable at any time. It's always accessible. And I think that's one of the things that for me, I think that'd be one of the downsides of being no longer anonymous and always tied back to a human too, is you do kind of now have that one-to-one that is not turn-offable. I can't say these groups can't look at my profile very easily, right? And if you do, you often limit what Laura was talking about that unique me and letting people just see me and being out there and being whatever I'm wanting to be on the internet, right? In that way. And I think you lose some of that creativity of that too. But I do think the positive would be...
I'll add that there are scenarios where the human tieback is critical, and those aren't quite yet answered for, but we've come a long way. Like, here's a great example. If you want to like I was logging into the VA to deal with some paperwork, and I use
Brendan's question's great.
An account provider for that, and it's tied back to like my actual identity, like literally my license, and they've done this whole identity verification process, and then the level of authentication I need to make it through. Like it is me that is signing in through hardware keys, through passwords, for identity verification. So there are circumstances where you need to be fully identified to do something because you're probably accessing taxes or healthcare or what have you, which is a whole nother issue, right? You think about logging into your doctor's like patient portal thing, they emailed you a 4-digit number and that's how they know it's you, right? So there's all these other challenges. On the flip side,
and the tracking
I really hate, see, on the flip side, the tracking cookie of like, hey, I searched for something like 3 years ago and I still get ads about it. Right, it's wild. So there's a middle ground somewhere.
Yeah, Brendan put a great point on here, and maybe we'll kick this over to Lindsay to at least maybe think on first, which was, and how could AI add to this? Right, we talk about this challenge of anonymity and what that means. Lindsay, what are your thoughts? How does AI add to the problem that gets created because of anonymity?
Yeah, it makes it easier. Like, I mean, really, honestly, like watching some of the things that are happening in social media, there's new bots that are being used on Insta stories, that are being used, on X, TikTok, lots of the different sites. And really, honestly, all you have to do is upload a couple of questions or words or whatever you want this AI to say, upload a couple of photos. So again, someone can go on one of your sites, if it's your Instagram, take 3 or 4 different headshots. I mean, they could even take our LinkedIn headshots, Matt, and like upload that. The AI now can build a complete build out of who you are and put you bodied up, hands and all, right? Like, it's not just the headshot. Yeah, it's not just the headshot.
Yeah. Now the hand might have too many fingers, I've noticed.
Yeah, I've seen that.
It is
Give an
getting
extra
That's why.
every now and again. I think AI adds to this from what you're saying, Lindsay, which is really just that speed of the attack surface being leveraged and the threat being real. Right. I think that's where, when you talk about, I can create fake mats very rapidly and do bad things with those, right, and tie back. The other thing I wanted to bring up too, which was, if you're no longer anonymous, but you're also not well authenticated, or the authentication doesn't stay, like the session cookies, them cookies, a session cookie theft, right? And what that does, because now I'm not anonymous and I'm Dom, but I'm now provably doing bad things as Dom, even though I'm not Dom. And so now you get into some challenges where the anonymity being foolproof, but not having adequate session controls, not having adequate authentication authorization capabilities.
That's identity theft in the real world, right? Like if I don't do a good job locking up, maybe not if we go pre-digital, but if I don't do a good job locking up my social security card, right, or I carry it in my wallet like I'm not supposed to with my driver's license and everything else, then you steal my identity or you get a loan. I was part of the OPM breach and I had this whole nightmare scenario. As far as the bank's concerned or whoever is concerned, that's your loan and you're supposed to be paying it. And the amount of work you have to go through to be like, no, that's not my loan. I was a part of this breach. Here's what happened, right? Like the way to come back from that is extremely difficult if you've been authenticated and identity proof, right?
There you go.
It's very hard to come out of that if that identity is compromised, if it's been proofed with like an assurance level. That's what I was going for. Assurance levels, man.
There you go.
Made it.
Agreed.
We got it.
So one last comment and then we'll wrap this up. Matt Horning said, the problem with the internet is that people say stuff they'd never say to your face. True story, right? Because you're much closer to my arm reach. It's tough to hold people accountable for their actions. I agree with that. I think that is one of the challenges of the internet, not specific to anonymity, but just in general. It creates the ability for, and anonymity adds to this. If you don't believe me, go read r/MSP and tell me if you don't think anonymity emboldens people to say horrible things. It certainly does.
Get a bowl of popcorn before you start.
You, Matt Topper. I know that's your baby, but that does create that, and it can be good and it can be bad. And I think what I'd like to close with is, as everything in technology, as everything in life, there's always a good and a bad. There's always some positive and some negative for certain things. And I think this is one of those where the industry will solve this as we continue going. But if I was making a prediction, I don't think we go forever with this level of anonymity and not being able to tie back to humans just from the implications. We've already seen it. What, 12 trillion in cybercrime? Like, come on. Like, that's a real problem.
It's one of the biggest industries in the world. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the third largest economy in the world by GDP. And Matt Topper, I love you, buddy. I got your frowny face, which is a very accurate and funny frowny face. And I hope that's not the one pointed at me, bro. I hope you're just being commenting. I don't want frowny faces. And wait a minute. This is the best comment. Wait, does AI fix the Matt Lee eye?
We're going to have to test this.
It was an AI bot. Yeah.
He said I have built-in MFA, right? So I have built-in MFA. It's called a 30-degree offset of my left eye. No, Lindsay, I appreciate having you on here. As I had expected, this was a barrel of laughs, and I really love just having your boisterous personality and brain in our company and being at Pax8, and I love you with all my heart. So thank you for joining us and everything you do for our charitable work. And the auditors are in the room with Dom, so I'm getting the heck out of here. Dom, let's close this out.
Getting out of it. Thanks so much for coming on again, Lindsay. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. That's our show for this week. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. A little bit more housekeeping. We are taking a week off next week, taking a little break from the grind, but we will see you in 2 weeks for a topic to be announced.